In a palace of glittering spies and armored lords, Torvin Shaw's survival depended on a single, humble truth. No one ever looks at the man cleaning the floor. Here was the grand processional corridor of the Kiran Imperial Palace. Now was the 5th year of his parole. He kept his eyes down, his shoulders in a perpetual stoop of a man who had mastered the art of being human furniture. Invisibility was a skill he'd honed more carefully than any blade, and here, it was the only one that mattered. A discarded candied nut, dropped by a passing noble child, lay near the wall. Torvin saw it. A week ago, he'd seen a courier's data slate slip from her satchel. He had kept mopping both times. His first rule, the one that kept the ghosts quiet, was simple. You are a machine that cleans floors. You do not see, you do not hear, you do not get involved. The sound of derisive laughter, sharp and cruel, echoed down the hall. It was a familiar sound in the court of King Theron, common as the scent of ionized air from the palace's energy systems. Torvin's rhythm didn't falter. Squeak, slosh, squeak.
"Look at him, trembling,"
a voice sneered. The Kiran words clipped with the arrogance of inherited power. Torvin's eyes, without his permission, flickered up. 3 young nobles, their ceremonial sashes marking them as sons of the king's own Kairos Justicars, had cornered a smaller figure, Prince Hadrian. His hands tightened on the mop handle. The smell of burning plasma, the scrape of metal on rock, and the boy's shout, his brother's shout, cut short by a sickening crack. A ghost of a memory, sharp as shrapnel. The cold, analytical part of his mind, the part he could never silence, awoke from its slumber.
Lead noble, overconfident stance, weight on his back foot. A sweeping leg trip, uses momentum. Follow with an elbow strike to the floating ribs, discombobulate. Less than 2 seconds. Second noble, distracted, laughing. A hard shove into the third. A quick, brutal choke on the primary target before the others can recover. 3 seconds, max.
The thought was an intrusive echo from another life. A life where he was Sergeant Shaw of the 101st Human Expeditionary Force, not Torvin, parolee number 1138. He forced the ghost back into its box, his knuckles relaxing. His job was to clean the mess, not make a bigger one. The lead bully knocked a pitcher of nectar that caught the light with a violet sheen from the prince's hands. It shattered, splashing a sticky, violet puddle across the floor Torvin had just polished.
"Can't even carry a bloody drink,"
the bully spat.
"How do you expect to carry a scepter then, little whelp? Straighten your back. You look like a servant."
Hadrian, his face a mask of burning shame, didn't answer. He just stared at the mess, his shoulders hunched. The bullies, their amusement spent, shoved the prince one last time. He stumbled against the wall, small and utterly alone.
"Tell your father that you need more combat drills,"
one of them called as they swaggered off, their laughter a receding poison. Torvin waited, counting the seconds until their footsteps faded. He pushed his cart forward, the squeak of its wheels the only sound. His destination was the puddle. As he worked, he noticed a flicker of movement at the far end of the hall. Lord Malachor, the king's spymaster, a thin, wraith-like figure who seemed to be woven from the palace's shadows. Malachor's gaze lingered on the small, silent form of the prince. His focus was sharp, predatory, as if assessing a new piece on a game board. A moment later, he was gone, as if the shadows had simply reclaimed him. Torvin finished with the spell, the floor once again a perfect, unbroken sheet of black. He turned to leave, his duty done. His rule was intact, but the image of the boy's face, the profound, helpless humiliation in his eyes, had snagged on something inside him. It reminded him of another boy's face, of his brother, cornered by bigger boys in the schoolyard, a lifetime ago in a world now lost to him. He hesitated for a single, fatal heartbeat. Then, breaking his own sacred rule, He turned his cart and followed the path the prince had taken. He found the prince huddled in a maintenance alcove, tucked behind nutrient conduits and humming junction boxes. His small frame was racked with silent sobs. For 5 years, Torvin had walked past courtiers, ignored slights, and erased himself from every room he entered. This felt different from the courtly politics he learned to ignore. It was the simple fact of a child crying in the dark. He stopped his cart and stepped into the alcove. The prince flinched, looking up with wide, terrified eyes, glistening with tears that had traced clean paths through the dust on his cheeks. Torvin said nothing. He simply knelt. The stone floor was cold against his knee. He reached out, not to the prince's shoulder, but to his boot, where a ceremonial lace had come undone in the scuffle. With calloused fingers that moved in a slow, deliberate sequence, they knew their way around the guts of a pulse rifle better than they knew fine silks. He began to retie it. From a shadowed archway 20 paces down the hall, Queen Karis watched. She had been searching for her son, a familiar knot of dread tightening in her chest. She saw the human janitor, a creature of the lowest possible status, a remnant of a border spat her husband had won, approach her son. Her hands had flown to the personnel alarm concealed in her bracelet, a silent signal that would bring her Soral guards in seconds. But then, he had knelt. The act was so shocking, so contrary to every precept of Chiron culture, that it rooted her to the spot. To kneel was the ultimate act of submission, a gesture for the vanquished. She saw it not as an act of supplication, but as an act of care. In a society obsessed with height, posture, and dominance, where even a glance was measured for insolence, this human had lowered himself to meet her son's pain. The gesture was so foreign, so uncalculated, it felt like a broadcast from another universe. It was a thought so treasonous, it felt like a key turning in a lock she'd forgotten existed. In that single, humble gesture, the parolee had shown more nobility than any preening lord in Theron's court.
That was an old story from my world,
Torvin said, his voice low and raspy, a tool not often used for gentle things. He kept his eye on the boot.
About a trickster spirit and a very clever rabbit. All the big, strong animals, the wolves, the bears, they laughed at him. They thought his size was a weakness.
Hadrian's sobbing quieted to a ragged sniffle.
And what did he do?
The wolf was proud.
Torvin continued, his fingers working on the other bootlace, making a neat, secure knot.
He thought that his teeth and his anger were the only answer to any problem. So the rabbit, he didn't fight him. He tricked him. He told the wolf about a special patch of sweet roots on the other side of a deep tar pit. The wolf was so sure of its own strength, so eager to prove it, he just charged right in.
Torvin gave the second lace a final, gentle tug.
He got stuck. The rabbit just hopped around him. Didn't need to be stronger. He just needed to be smarter.
He finally looked up, meeting the prince's gaze.
Strength isn't just about shouting, Your Highness. Sometimes it's about seeing the tar pit before you jump.
He rose, gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, and walked away, his mop cart squeaking its rhythmic, mundane song. Karis remained in the shadows, her heart beating a strange, unfamiliar rhythm. For the first time in years, it wasn't from fear. That evening, King Theron was demonstrating strength. He stood before the High Council, his hand resting on the back of the onyx throne. Beside him stood General Krev, a veteran of the Human War, his face a road map of hard-won campaigns.
General Krev's report on the Cadian uprisings is insufficient,
Theron announced, his voice a low rumble that commanded attention.
He advises caution. He speaks of negotiation.
Theron's gaze swept the assembled nobles.
Caution is the refuge of the timid. Negotiation is the solace of the weak.
Karis, seated on a smaller, ceremonial chair to the right of the throne, watched her husband. She'd noticed it then, something she'd seen with increasing frequency. As Theron gestured, his right hand trembled. A subtle, high-frequency tremor he quickly concealed by clenching it into a fist. He was a master of control, but the cracks were beginning to show. His obsession with strength, she realized, had become a desperate war against the enemy within his own nerves.
My father,
Theron continued, his voice laced with contempt,
negotiated with the rebels of the Orpheus stream. They thanked him for his mercy by planting a bomb in his shuttle.
He turned his cold gaze on the old general.
Mercy is a poison we feed to ourselves. General Krev, your command is revoked. You will be reassigned to oversee supply logistics on the Outer Rim, a task more suited to your temperament.
The general paled, but bowed his head.
As you command, Your Majesty.
It was a public humiliation, a death sentence for a proud soldier's career. It was a message to everyone present. I am not my father. I am not weak. Later, in her private solar, Karis was reviewing encrypted communiques from her cousin, Lord Darien of House Soral. They discussed trade tariffs and grain shipments, but the subtext was clear. They were shoring up their house's power, a quiet bulwark against the king's increasingly erratic paranoia.
A fascinating display of statecraft, Your Majesty.
Karis didn't startle. Lord Malachor had a way of entering a room as if he'd been there all along, merely choosing to become visible. He stepped from the shadows near the doorway. "The king's methods are his own, my lord," she said, her voice devoid of warmth as she deactivated the data slate.
Indeed,
Malachor said, his lips a thin, unmoving line.
His Majesty believes such lessons build character, for generals and for princes.
The unspoken threat settled in the silence between them.
I came to report that the Justicar's sons have been reprimanded for their zeal. I trust the prince has recovered from the incident.
He is resilient, Karis said, her jaw tight.
Of course.
Malachor's eyes, like chips of jet, scanned the room.
It is merely an observation, but my agents have noticed that you have been taking a more personal interest in the palace's maintenance schedule of late. Your walks, your choice of corridors, it is irregular. One might think you are inspecting for inefficiencies.
The threat was a delicate, deliberate incision into her composure. I am watching you. I see everything. My routines are my own, my lord, Karis said, each word clipped and cold. And my son's well-being is my paramount concern. See that the Justicar whelps remember that.
It shall be done, Your Majesty.
Malachor bowed and receded into the shadows, leaving Karis with the chilling certainty that the walls of her cage were not just gilded, but sentient. The Spy Master's warning was a cage, but Karis was a queen. She knew how to work within cages. She did not seek Torvin out. She simply began to exist in the spaces he was forced to occupy. The rooftop solstice garden was a place Theron detested for its unproductive sentimentality. It was her sanctuary. One afternoon, she was there, ostensibly reading, when a coolant line for the hydroponic system ruptured, spraying a fine, cold mist. An accident. She sent a page for maintenance. Torvin arrived. He didn't speak, just assessed the problem with his tools. It worked with a quiet, focused competence that was almost beautiful to watch. "Thank you," she said when the hissing stopped.
"Just doing my job, Your Majesty,"
he replied, his eyes on the conduit, not her. But as he wiped his hands on a rag, he glanced at a nearby planter.
"The soil's too packed. The roots will choke. The things need room to breathe if you want them to grow."
He met her eyes for a half-second, then turned and left. Another day, she was in the royal armory, inspecting the ceremonial guard's equipment. She ran a gloved hand along the haft of a shock pike polished to a mirror sheen.
"The balance on these seems off,"
she mused to the armorer, a stout Chiron loyal to the king.
"The vibration emitters must be misaligned."
The armorer scoffed.
They are perfectly calibrated, Your Majesty."
"A second opinion, then,"
Karis said mildly.
"Fetch the human janitor. I have seen him repair coolant lines. He has an eye for immaculate detail."
Torvin was summoned, his face a careful blank. Karis watched as he picked up a shock pike. For a fleeting moment, the stooped janitor vanished. He held the weapon as if it were a part of him, an extension of his own limb. He spun it in a short, tight arc, a blur of motion so fluid it was almost invisible. He checked the emitter's cowling, ran a thumb over the activation stud, and tested the weight at the pommel.
"The gyroscopic stabilizer's 1/100th of a degree off center,"
he said. He pointed to a tiny seam.
"Causes a micro-vibration, wastes energy. Slows recovery time after a full power strike by the 10th of a second."
He placed the pike back on the rack. "It's sloppy." The armorer stared, speechless. Karis felt a thrill, sharp and dangerous, run down her spine.
"Efficiency is its own reward, my queen,"
Torvin said, the words a gentle deflection as he met her gaze, then bowed slightly and left, leaving the faint tang of charged conductors and unspoken truths in his wake. The third meeting was an accident. Karis was walking with Hadrian in a quieter service hallway when her son, trying to tell her more about Torvin's rabbit story, stumbled. It wasn't hurt, but a small, intricate data chip he had been holding skittered across the floor and fell through a maintenance grate. Hadrian's face fell. It was a star chart, a gift from her. Before Karis could summon a guard, a panel on the wall slid open. Torvin was inside, replacing a burnt-out light fixture. He had seen the whole thing. He looked at Hadrian's crestfallen face, then at the grate. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of a lost war, he set down his tools, knelt, and used a magnetic probe to painstakingly retrieve the chip. He held it out to the prince.
"Hold on to what's important,"
he said, his voice softer this time. He glanced at Karis, his expression betraying a flicker of resignation before he retreated back into the wall. Each meeting was a stone dropped into the still pool of her life, and the ripples were growing wider, more complex, and infinitely more perilous. The grand observatory at the apex of the palace spire had been silent for a generation. Theron considered astronomy a pointless frivolity. It was vast, dusty, and forgotten. A security alert blared through the spire. Level 3 lockdown. A system-wide diagnostic, unscheduled, trapping everyone where they stood. The magnetic locks hissed shut. The alert had been triggered by an anonymous security flag from an external source. A flag Lord Malachor had planted himself. He had grown tired of observing. It was time to create a variable. In the cavernous, starlit dome of the observatory, 2 people were trapped. Karis, who had gone there seeking a moment of solitude, and Torvin, who had been sent to recalibrate the dormant atmospheric regulators. The enemy had forced their hand. For 10 minutes they stood in silence, separated by the vast, dust-sheet form of the ancient star mapper. The only light came from the cosmos, visible through the dome's immense, curved plasteel.
"You don't fight like a janitor,"
she finally said, her voice echoing in the chamber. He didn't pretend to misunderstand.
"No, Your Majesty, I don't."
"You were a soldier."
"Sergeant,"
he corrected softly. The smell of plasma, his brother's shout.
Long time ago.
Why are you here? She asked, the question hanging between them, meaning everything. In the palace, you could have chosen a mining pro, a freighter crew, anonymity.
The quietest place in a storm is the eye,
he said, his gaze on a swirling nebula. He rubbed a worn spot on his tunic, right where his sergeant's stripes used to be.
No one looks at the man mopping the floor. I came here to be forgotten.
He paused.
I made a choice in the war to save my squad. It's a hard choice. It cost a lot. I thought if I just erased myself, then maybe the ghosts would get tired of hunting me.
Karis felt a pang of recognition. She, too, was haunted by the ghost of the woman she might have been.
I am not allowed ghosts,
she said, her voice barely a whisper.
A queen.
A queen must be a symbol, pure, untroubled, a vessel for the dynasty.
A cage is still a cage, no matter how much gold they use in the bars.
Torvin replied. He turned from the stars to look at her, and the professional mask was gone. His eyes reflected a profound weariness, and a depth of empathy she felt in her very soul. He saw her, not the queen, not the symbol, her. The space between them cracked with an energy more potent than any shock pike. She didn't know who moved first. It didn't matter. One moment they were worlds apart, the next they were breathlessly close. His hand, rough and scarred, came up to cup her cheek. A touch so gentle it was almost a question. Then he kissed her. It wasn't a soft, courtly kiss. It was desperate. It was a decade of loneliness, of duty, of silent screams poured into a single, shattering moment of contact. It was everything they couldn't say, everything they shouldn't feel. It was rebellion. It was hope. It was madness. A hidden microdrone, no bigger than a fly, hovered silently in the shadows of the dome's superstructure, the lens recording every detail. When the lockdown alarm chimed, signaling the end of the hour, they pulled apart as if burned. Torvin bowed, the janitor's mask back in place, and left as soon as the doors hissed open. Karis remained, her heart hammering, her whole body trembling. Lord Malachor did not go to the king. To present such a report was a clumsy, unpredictable act. An enraged king was a blunt instrument, and Malachor preferred the scalpel. He requested a private audience with the queen. He found her in the solstice garden. He didn't bow.
Your Majesty,
he began, his voice flat. He held out a data slate.
A recording from a routine security sweep of the upper spire. I believe that you will find the audio-visual quality to be quite clear.
Karis took the slate. She watched the grainy footage of the kiss in the observatory. Her blood ran cold.
What do you want, Malachor?
She asked, her voice steady despite the terror coiling in her gut.
Want?
The spy master gave a thin, reptilian smile.
I want what I have always wanted. Stability. Order. The king is a lion, Your Majesty. A magnificent, powerful beast. But he is wounded. His paranoia grows with every tremor in his hand. He is becoming a liability to the Empire.
He took a step closer.
You, on the other hand, are intelligent, respected by your house. You have the love of the people, but you lack influence, direct power.
The blackmail was clear. He wasn't going to expose her. He was going to use her.
You will be my agent within the court,
he continued.
You will guide the king's decisions with my counsel.
You will approve my budgets. You will place my allies in key positions, and in return, this recording remains our secret. The human lives, the throne remains stable, and you, my queen, will finally wield true power.
He expected her to acquiesce, to be the frightened woman in the gilded cage, grateful for a way out. Karis looked from the data slate to the spy master's cold, expectant eyes. The thought of Torvin kneeling to tie her son's shoe. She thought of the story about the rabbit. She thought of his kiss, a moment of breathtaking, terrifying freedom. Malachor was offering her a larger cage with longer chains. She handed the slate back to him.
No,
she said. The word was quiet, but it was made of iron. Malachor's eyes narrowed.
Reconsider, your majesty. The alternative is, I will not be your puppet, my lord,
she said, her voice rising with a strength she hadn't felt in years.
I will not trade one master for another. Do what you will.
It was the bravest thing she'd ever done. It was also a death sentence. Malachor stared at her for a long moment, his face a mask of cold fury.
A pity,
he whispered.
You would have made a magnificent piece on the board, and instead you have chosen to be a sacrifice.
He turned and walked away, the data slate in his hand. He didn't go to his king. He leaked the recording to Lord Tarak, a cousin of the king known for his fanaticism, his devotion to bloodline purity, and his loud mouth. Within hours, the rumor was a poison whispered in every corridor of the palace. The queen and a human. The throne defiled. King Theron was cornered, his humiliation made public before he even knew its source. He had no choice but to act, and to act with overwhelming, brutal force. The king's fury, when it came, was a volcanic eruption. Torvin was dragged before the throne, not in a private audience, but in the full, public glare of the assembled court. The whispers had become a roar. Theron stood, his face a mask of apocalyptic rage, not just at the betrayal, but at the public shame.
Torvin Shaw, the king's voice boomed. You have repaid our mercy by befouling the most sacred institution of the Kiran Empire.
He didn't need to state the crime. Everyone already knew. Torvin said nothing. He looked at Karis. She stood beside the throne, her face a perfect, terrifying mask of neutrality. Her eyes were fixed on a point in the distance. That mask was the only thing keeping her alive. He knew she had been given a choice, and she had chosen defiance. She had chosen him.
You will undergo the purification, Theron pronounced. Your existence will be unmade piece by painful piece in the public square. Let all know the price of contaminating a superior bloodline.
He gestured dismissively.
Take him to the dungeons.
As the Justicars hauled him away, Torvin's eyes met Karis's. In their depths, beneath the ice, he saw a fire of pure, unadulterated terror. And it wasn't for herself. He saw them drag Torvin away. He heard the whispers, the ugly words. Human filth, the queen's pet. His father's roar of condemnation echoed in his memory. He ran to his mother's chambers, but Soral guards stood at the door, their faces grim.
The queen is confined by order of the king,
one of them said, not meeting his eyes. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He was just a boy, a whelp. What could he do? He remembered Torvin's words. Strength isn't about shouting. It was about seeing the tar pit. He hid in the servants' passages, his mind racing. He had to do something, but what? Who would help him? The Justicars were his father's creatures. The Soral guards were loyal to his mother, but they were trapped. Then he remembered. The other human. The tired-looking man in the dungeons. Fen. For a day and a night, Hadrian watched and waited, gathering his courage. He stole his father's royal signet ring from a jewelry box in the king's empty private study. He knew it could be used to sign official pardons. It was a desperate, foolish hope. He made his way to the dungeons, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He found Fen on the midnight shift, his face illuminated by a green control panel.
Your Highness,
Fen said, his voice a low rumble of surprise. Hadrian didn't command. He pleaded.
They have him,
He whispered.
Torvin Shaw, my father, the purification.
The words felt like acid in his mouth.
He's one of you, a human, and he's a good man.
Fen's face was a stony mask.
he broke his parole. There's nothing I can do.
Please.
Hadrian begged, his voice cracking. He held out the king's signet ring.
Take this. With this, you can sign your own pardon. You can be set free. Just help him. There's a plan. There's a plan. An old emergency measure my mother created. Rendezvous at the ancestral hall. We just need to get him there.
Fen stared at the ring, then at the prince's desperate face. He had seen the Kiron court up close for years. He knew its cruelty. He had shared silent, bitter nods with Shaw in the corridors. A shared acknowledgement of their station. Two forgotten soldiers. Helping was suicide, but here was the heir to the throne, offering him freedom, begging him to save one of his own. It was a chance to spit in the eye of the empire that had broken him.
A pardon signed by me would be worthless once the king finds out,
Fen said grimly. But he looked down the dark corridor, where the sounds of another prisoner's agony echoed faintly. He made a decision. Keep the ring. A prince's promise is worth more. He unlocked a small maintenance locker.
I can't get you a weapon, but I can cause a diversion. A massive power surge into the upper levels. It'll knock out the security systems on the level for about 3 minutes. It'll send every guard on the lower level scrambling to the wrong place. He handed Hadrian a heavy metallic key. Cell block Gamma. That's where they're holding him. The rest is on you. Now go.
He sat in the dark, the screams from down the hall his only clock. They'd stopped an hour ago. He knew what was next. He wasn't afraid of dying. He had made his peace with that long ago. He was afraid of how he would die, afraid of the slow, methodical unmaking. A hard choice. It cost a lot. The ghosts were loud in the darkness. The faces of the colonists on Caldera 4, the ones he had rerouted the orbital strike towards to save his retreating squad. His brother had been in that squad. The choice had saved one family member and damned 100 others. This, he thought, was the bill coming due. A low, whining hum echoed through the dungeon, followed by a concussive boom that shook the stones. The lights died, replaced by the dim, red glow of emergency beacons. An alarm blared from the upper levels. A moment later, the magnetic lock on his cell door hissed and disengaged. It slid open. Prince Hadrian stood there, pale but resolute. He held no weapon, only a key.
My mother's emergency plan,
the boy whispered, his voice shaking.
The ancestral hall. We have to go, now.
Torvin didn't hesitate. He followed the young prince into the chaos, the reflexes of his old life taking over. He was unarmed, but his hands were weapons. The environment was a weapon. Every corner was an opportunity. They moved through the labyrinthian servant passages, Torvin a silent shadow at the prince's back. They emerged from a hidden panel behind the ancestral altar. The vast, circular chamber was lit by the living hollow tapestry on the walls, displaying the glowing sigils of 1,000 years of Chiron rulers. Karis was there, dressed in practical, dark traveling clothes. With her were 4 of her personal sorrel guards, their faces grim, their energy pikes held at the ready. Relief washed over her face.
Torvin,
she breathed. For a moment, there was a tiny, defiant island in the heart of the Empire. Then, the massive main doors of the hall groaned open. King Theron stood there, flanked by 24 of his elite Kairos Justicars. He sneered.
"Fleeing, my love," he said. "A touching, pathetic little portrait of treason."
He raised his hand.
"Take them."
But as the Justicars advanced, Hadrian stepped forward.
I invoke the right of honor claim.
His voice rang out clear and strong. The Justicars stopped. Theron's sneer faltered. To invoke the right in this sacred hall was an unbreakable contract.
I challenge you, Father,
Hadrian continued.
For the life and freedom of my mother, and for the life and freedom of Torvin Shaw.
Theron threw his head back and laughed. A horrifying, joyless sound.
You challenge me, a weak son and his pet.
His eyes gleamed with cunning malice.
I accept, but the right allows for champions. The challenge is for 2 lives, so I name my champions to meet it. My entire Justicar honor guard against your champion, the human.
He drew his magnificent double-bladed energy glaive.
Let the ancestors see how true strength crushes sentiment. Let the lesson begin.
The Justicars formed a circle, a wall of armor and humming pikes. It was a grotesque perversion of the right, but technically within its ancient labyrinthian rules, a king's prerogative. Karros's 4 Soral guards moved to stand with Torvin, forming a tiny, doomed phalanx.
No,
Torvin said to them, his voice low and urgent.
Protect the Queen and the Prince. Form a line at the altar. Don't let anyone past.
He was buying them seconds, nothing more. He faced the closing circle alone. 24 Justicars and a king against 1 unarmed man. The clever rabbit was in a cage with a pack of wolves. See the tar pit, he thought. His eyes darted around the hall. He saw the polished basalt floor, the massive support pillars, and the intricate network of silver conduits running along the base of the walls. Part of the hall's decorative water and misting system meant to keep the air cool. A tar pit in waiting. Theron roared and charged, his glaive a whirlwind of blue energy. Torvin did not meet the charge. He dodged, not away, but towards the wall. As a Justicar lunged, Torvin grabbed the haft of his shock pike, pivoted, and used the guard's own momentum to slam him into another. He wrenched the pike free. It was heavy, poorly balanced compared to a human pulse rifle, but it was a weapon. He didn't try to fight them head-on. He became a phantom, a ghost flitting between the massive pillars. He used the pike not to kill, but to cripple. A strike to a knee joint, a jab to a wrist. It was a surgeon of violence, dismantling the Justicar attack piece by piece. But there were too many of them. For every one he disabled, 2 more took their place. He parried a blow from Theron that sent shudders up his arms, the force of it nearly tearing the pike from his hands. He was being worn down. He was out of time. With a desperate lunge, he slammed the butt of his captured pike against one of the silver conduits on the wall. It ruptured with a hiss, spraying a torrent of icy water across the slick basalt floor. He smashed another, then a third. The center of the hall became a shallow, treacherous lake. The Justicars, in their heavy armor, lost their footing. Their charge dissolved into a clumsy, slipping chaos. Theron, enraged by the tactic, roared and sloshed through the water, his royal pride immune to caution.
Coward! Face me!
He led Theron on a chase, splashing through the spreading puddle toward a primary power junction for the hall's lighting. With a final, desperate burst of strength, he swung his pike like an axe, shattering the junction's protective casing. A thick, insulated power cable, as thick as his arm, fell into the water with a shower of sparks. Theron, realizing the danger too late, tried to back away, but his feet slipped on the wet floor. Torvin kicked the live cable. The water around the king erupted in a flash of arcing electricity. Thoron screamed, his body convulsing as thousands of volts coursed through his armor. He collapsed into the electrified water, his limbs twitching, his glaive clattering from his grasp. Torvin lunged, grabbing the glaive and deactivating it. He kicked the power cable away and stood over the fallen king, who was gasping, stunned and disarmed. The remaining Justicar stared in shock. Their king, their symbol of Chiron's strength, had been defeated by a janitor's trick. Torvin stood over the kneeling, twitching form of the king. The rite was over. He had won. Thoron looked up, his face a mask of pure, undiluted hatred. He spat a glob of bloody water onto the floor. He snarled.
This changes nothing. I am still the king. I will not kill the boy. I will do worse. I will raise him. I will forge him in my image. He will learn to despise weakness, to despise his mother, and most of all, to despise the memory of you. He will become everything you fought against. I will burn your hope out of him cell by cell. I swear it.
It was more a terrifying threat than death. It was the promise of eternal corruption. Torvin's eyes flickered to Karis. She stood by the altar, her face pale, her eyes wide with horror. She saw the hesitation in Torvin's stance, the soldier's reluctance to kill a helpless foe. And she saw what mercy would cost her son, their family, their future. Her chin lifted. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. A shared burden. A final, terrible necessity. Torvin's hesitation vanished. He reversed the energy glaive, the twin blades humming to life. His role was not that of a king or a judge. He was a protector. He was a man with one last, honest, hard choice to make. He drove the blade down. There was a final, shocked gasp from the king, and then silence. At that exact same moment, a collective gasp went through the hall. Everyone looked at the living wall of light, the glowing, intricate sigil of King Thoron of House Kairos, which had burned brightly for 30 years, flickered once, twice, and then went dark. A black, empty space in the tapestry of 1,000 years of rule. The heartstone inside the onyx throne, its biolink severed, had rendered its judgment. The king was dead. The line was broken. The Kairos Justicars, their faces a mixture of grief, rage, and horrified disbelief, let out a collective roar. Their king was dead. Their honor was shattered. Their faith was shaken. But their loyalty was a fanatic's creed. They charged. Karis's 4 Soral guards moved instantly, forming a thin, defiant line in front of her, their pikes humming. One faction against another. A civil war in miniature. "Hold!" Karis's voice rang with an authority that was forged in that terrible, final moment. She stepped past her guards, her hand on the ancestral altar. "The rite is concluded. The Heartstone has spoken." She pointed a steady finger at the black hole in the wall. "The ancestors have given their judgment. There is no king to avenge." The Justicars faltered, their charge breaking into a confused halt. Their rage warred with their reverence for the throne's ancient technology. The standoff was broken by a weak groan. Hadrian, shielded by the Soral guards, pushed himself to his feet. He looked at his father's body, then at the black sigil, then at his mother. "She's right," he said, his voice weak but carrying across the silent hall. "She speaks for the throne. She speaks for me." The word of the Kairos heir broke their fanaticism. The Justicar captain, a hard-faced veteran, stared at the prince, then at the queen. His certainty shattered. With a sound that was a half-sob, half-surrender, he dropped to one knee. One by one, the rest of the Justicars followed, their pikes clattering on the wet floor. They knelt. As the last Justicar knelt, Lord Malachor stepped from the shadows of a pillar. He had been there the whole time. He was not a Justicar. He did not kneel. He simply watched, his face an unreadable mask. He gave a slow, calculating nod to Karis, a look of appraisal, not of fealty. Then he melted back into the gloom. Hours later, the great hall was cleared. The body of the king had been removed. The palace was a sea of whispers and shifting loyalties. In the queen's private chambers, Hadrian slept, exhausted on the divan. Torvin stood by the window, his side patched by a medical drone. He wore a simple gray tunic provided by the Soral guards.
"They will not accept it," he said. "The other Karis loyal houses. Human paroli, a war criminal, killing their king. This has to be a civil war."
He turned to her, his face etched with a weary resignation.
"I have to disappear, Karis. You have to let me be a myth, a ghost story. It's the only way to protect you, to protect him."
He was offering to erase himself again, for them. She walked to him, her heart aching.
"You knelt for my son,"
she said softly.
"You fought for my family. You took a life for me. You are done hiding in the shadows."
A soft chime at the door interrupted them. Lord Darien of House Sorol, her cousin and staunchest ally, entered. He bowed low, his face grim.
"My queen,"
he said, his voice urgent.
"it has begun."
The three great Kairos loyalist houses, Tarak, Rydek, and Jakar, they have seized the planetary comms array. They are broadcasting a systems-wide message branding you the usurper queen and calling for the head of the human assassin who profaned the ancestral hall. He placed a tactical map on her grand table. It glowed to life, showing the capital city. 3 large sectors around the comms array, the primary spaceport, and the orbital defense command were flashing red. Hostile. "They have claimed their banners," Darien said. "They are marching on the palace." The civil war was no longer a threat, but a reality. Torvin looked from the map to Karis, his face a mask of grim resolve. He had traded one war for another. Karis looked at the map, the glowing red symbols of treason and war. She felt no fear, only a cold, hard clarity. She took Torvin's hand, lacing her fingers through his. His hand was rough and scarred. Hers were smooth and regal. They fit together perfectly.
"You showed them that nobility is not about a title, but about a character,"
she said, her voice ringing with the iron of her ancestors.
"You are my choice, Torvin Shaw."
She looked at her cousin, then back to Torvin, her partner, the man who had knelt for her son and stood with her against a kingdom.
"You are my king consort, and I am your queen,"
she declared.
"Let the houses whisper their treason. We will not hide. We will meet them."
Her eyes, once reflecting the bars of a gilded cage, now burned with the fire of a ruler ready for war.
"We will live in the light,"
she said, her voice a promise.
"and we will fight in it."